curious if once you're gotten that point of, I guess I call it realization, awakening, whatever word you
Yeah.
want to insert there. Um, did you recognize your old self anywhere?
I I kind of passively knew who I had been and kind of always was, I guess, as well. And so yeah, I mean, but I was a completely different person. It was 100% change for me. Uh I was so much more at peace and calm, and there was this level of like acceptance, and I think people use the word surrender a lot as well.
Hmm.
Letting go, of attachments to stuff that was holding me back. And so yeah, I recognized who I had been, um but I was way different.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where we empower you to live your best audacious life ever. I'm thrilled that you can join us here, and thankful and appreciate that you've taken the time out of your busy day to be a part of this journey. And as we continue on this journey, one of the things that we learn in life is that as the same way a sculptor molds his clay to a beautiful statue, we shape our lives through the decisions and actions we take every day. And on the topic of shaping our lives, we have a really special guest, Mr. John Lawyer, whose journey from military service to spiritual seeker embodies the audacious spirit we champion here on this podcast. You know, John is a former soldier turned spiritual guide who dedicated to helping others find their inner peace and wholeness. With a background in his military service and a profound spiritual awakening, John brings a unique perspective on life as well as personal growth. Let's check out our conversation that we had, because it certainly was a profound one. Hey, John, thank you for being here and joining me today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you making the time like this. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Oddly, thanks for having me on. I appreciate your show and the message that it puts out in the world. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, great. This is as a labor of love, and on this podcast, we spend so much time, and again, encouraging individuals to live that best, audacious life, and just go after things that they're meant to. And it's always interesting because uh, we don't always, see the staircase, so to speak. I think there's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote where you can't see the staircase, but you take that step anyways, right? And so that's what I really want to encourage, because first of all, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to lead to. You never know what path you're going to be on, and it's just the way to go as far as I see it. So that's what we're here to talk about. You've got a unique background serving in the Army and counter-terrorism, which is sounds really fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that. But perhaps as a starting point, John, you can sort of fill us in on you and the work you do, and what guides you to this day.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I started out as a soldier, ended up doing a lot of work as a civilian, doing kind of the same stuff that I did as a soldier, and then kind of got out of that life, came home to heal, and then spent a lot of time trying to figure myself out. And then one day I just kind of had a moment where the world made a lot more sense, the universe made a lot more sense, and I knew that I wanted to kind of start an online spiritual community and help people help themselves find their wholeness inside, and maybe help people communicate with themselves, communicate with each other. And so I started an online nonprofit spiritual community, and with my wife and another friend of ours, and that's what I do now. I'm a seeker and a student. I'm also a teacher and a guide, so I'm a little bit of both.
Now, I sort of appreciate the transition from military to civilian life to online teacher, right? It is an interesting journey. I know you didn't get. I'm sure there's a lot of details and chapters along the way that you didn't
Yeah,
really
for
get into,
sure.
but
Yeah.
certainly, I would imagine that part of you to get to where you're at now, there's some, for lack of a better term, and no pun intended, some soul searching, if you will.
Oddly, there was a lot of soul searching. Um, I think, I joined the Army straight out of high school
Okay.
and
So you grew
enlisted
up
in
in
the
the Army.
Army. Yeah, my whole youth was the first 15 years of my adult life. I spent 12 years in the desert in Kuwait,
Mm.
Iraq, and Afghanistan. And, uh, joining right out of high school, I joined the year before 9/11. So by the time I got out of basic training and my job training, I got to my permanent duty station in Georgia, and I only had 6 months there before 9/11 kicked off, and we were, big war, and uh, my whole life changed, and my brothers and sisters in arms, and all I knew after that uh, was war, and it was I was idealistic. I believed in what I was doing, and I still appreciate what I did, but I can look back at it now, and there there's so much that you learn as you grow up. And like I love
Yes.
that you said that I grew up in the Army, because I did grow up in the Army. I did grow up in the military as part of this like big giant machine that does these great things, but also does these kind of dark things sometimes. So yeah, I think that's a great way to say that I grew up in the Army.
So I guess when you return and want to be part of civilian life, that's really what you're doing. That's a bit of a process, especially when you weren't in it civilian life. I mean, it almost sounds like the time you're in the military was comparable to when you were in civilian life. I mean, outside of your childhood, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was a soldier for 5 years, and then I got out, and I did the same thing as I did as a soldier, as a civilian. And on one hand, I was blessed. My wife and I had the same job, so we actually did all this together. In fact, we got married in Kuwait
Well,
uh, 20 years ago. Um, but yeah, I didn't really have any time as just like a person, because I was always working. I was working like 110 hours a week, 7 days a week, like completely dedicated to my job. So I was this military person in this, but I was also this driven professional, right? Like I'm like just trying to be the best that I could, completely dedicated to the job. And you don't really, you kind of lose yourself in that,
okay.
So I never really had a chance to like know who I was outside of my job, outside of combat, outside of being overseas. And I spent most of my time away from the US as well. So that was kind of interesting.
Hmm. So then you landed in the world of the spiritual community. How did that happen?
Yeah. When I came home, uh, I didn't really have an identity. I didn't really know who I was. So I'm like, hey, I got to find myself. I got to figure out who I am and heal. And VA helped me out. And that took a bunch of time. It took about 7 years. And then, uh, I wasn't,
Sorry, John. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Heal from what?
I had physical issues with like Gulf
Okay.
War syndrome and some other stuff, exposed to depleted uranium.
Okay.
But I also had, PTSD, um, uh, depression, anxiety, OCD. I mean, you pretty much name it. And after 12 years in the desert, I pretty much had it. I was really busted, and I can look back on that and say that's okay.
Right.
It's okay to have been completely broken, right? And I think that being in that dark place gives you that great contrast to the light. Like even if you can't
Mm.
see at the time, like suddenly, when you come out of the swamp, you come out of the desert, oh, you're like, oh, there's this great light over here. And I started to, I think, see that. I wasn't on a spiritual path. I didn't, I wasn't on, I mean, I think we're all on a journey, whether we know it or not, but I didn't know I was on a journey. I didn't know I was on a path. And so when I had kind of this moment of understanding or clarity a couple years ago, over 2 years ago now, it was just this great understanding that we're all kind of connected. There's this oneness of everything. It was this warm feeling of like loving kindness, and that we're kind of all saying the same thing, whether you're a Hindu or a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim, it doesn't matter. Like
Right.
we're all saying the same stuff. And you should be able to practice how you want to practice your philosophy or faith or belief, and in mine, but we should be able to do it together, standing side by side, having conversations. Um, so it kind of all led to that moment, and it was very very sudden for me.
Curious if you once you're gotten that point of, I guess I call it realization, awakening, whatever word you
Yeah.
want to insert there. Um, did you recognize your old self anywhere?
I I kind of passively knew who I had been and kind of always was, I guess, as well. And so yeah, I mean, but I was a completely different person. It was 100% change for me. Uh, I was so much more at peace and calm, and there is this level of like acceptance, and I think people use the word surrender a lot as well.
Hmm.
Letting go, of attachments to stuff that was holding me back, and so yeah, I recognized who I had been, um, but I was way different.
And were you healed from some of the mental stuff that you're dealing with, or was
Yeah,
that another process?
that's a good question. I don't get asked that very often. It's a really good question, and I've done as part of my spiritual path, I've done a lot of letting go. I've done a lot of acceptance, forgiving myself,
Hmm.
all that. And what I say is like, that is still a part of me. Even though I've let go of it, I moved past it. It's still a
Right.
part of who I am. It's still something that I do struggle with sometimes. I think that, the way that my brain was changed, there were physiological changes that happened to like my amygdala and stuff that happened in my brain that I'll probably never be, uh, completely like I was when, I was young before I experienced all that. So
Sure.
that's a difficult question to answer. And one that I always say, I've moved past it. It's still a part of who I am. It's still something I
Hmm.
deal with, but yeah, I'm a more complete person and a way more
That's a
whole
good way of
now. Is
saying it. That's a
I
good.
found my wholeness.
That's a good way of putting it. Well, part of the reason that I was curious about that is, you talked earlier about, you're a teacher and student at the same time. And so that suggests to me that, we're still learning, still developing, still
100%.
growing, still evolving, if you will. And so I wonder if there's any connection to that in your healing. And really, I think the most important thing in any kind of healing process or journey that we're on, one, it's individualized. So if I take 10 years to get through, I got to get through, and you take 3, that's our journeys. We're different paths. But the starting point has to be some sort of an awareness. And so clearly you've got that awareness, and that's just the next steps of doing the work to get you to where you need to be.
You have such great perspective on this. You have
Well,
such a
thank you.
great understanding of this. So
Thank you.
yeah, and I love that you talk about the journey because for me, that's what it's all about. And yes, I can be a teacher and a guide, but yeah, I'm still learning things and I'm still being taught by people I'm teaching. And uh, I think that's what we have to do. We have to learn something every day. We have to be fluid. I think we have, I don't believe in absolutes as a rule, but I think maybe the only absolute is change and the universal motion of everything. I think that
Yeah.
might be the only absolute, right? So we have to change with the universe. We have to move with the rhythm of the universe. So, and
You
it
know, we're
seems like you kind of understand that.
words like always and never are not really part of my
Yeah.
vocabulary, right? Or my
Right.
belief system, right? I truly think, and so going back on this journey we talked about, part of this journey of life is that there are hills and valleys, right? So there'll be ups and there will be downs, and I'm a big fan of and why not be on top of the hill? That's where life's great. Everyone's
Yeah.
happy. You're enjoying yourself. There's bliss. There's celebration. But part of that also knows that eventually it'll come down, and when it comes down and you meet it at the bottom, that's where we have that choice, John. We could stay there and be miserable how bad it is, or find a way to get to back on top of the hill again, where we can celebrate and be happy, right? And recognizing that we might be down the hill again. So I think the goal for us is always to find that way to get out of the valley as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And it's about choosing to live, that audacious living that you talk about. That's what it's and we do have that choice. I think that's so powerful to talk about. Like there's all these bad things that happen to us. And like
Yes.
I had the trauma of war for 12 years, but my trauma is no better or worse than anybody else that had a different trauma. And they had their own experience. But at some point we have to find out who we are with that
Hmm.
and where we're going to go with it. And we do have choices, and that's not taking away from what happened to us,
No.
or anything like that. And I think that's important for people to know and understand. yeah, you have a choice. Oh, that's hard because now, this happened to me, and, but you're telling me I have a choice. Well, yeah, but that's a powerful thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a powerful thing.
Well, and it's funny 'cause the question I was going to ask you, and you sort of touched on that with respects to that all that time you spent in the desert. How much of that has fueled you now, or how much feeds into where you're at now? Because I think when we see, if when people start talking about, well, that was the past, and I forget about that, and that was another time. Yes, it was another time, but forgetting about that, you're almost denying a piece of yourself. You're denying a piece of
Yeah.
your existence. And you're also, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, John, but you're also denying the lessons and the things that you learned
Yes.
during that time in the desert.
Yeah, I think if we completely try to amputate that darkness away from us, we're denying that darkness exists in the universe,
Yeah.
and that there's a balance out there between dark and light. And those lessons that we learn, these hard things that we learn in life along the way,
Yep.
that we hopefully that we learn.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Yeah, they're so valuable. And knowledge is one thing. We have knowledge, but knowledge through experience then becomes wisdom, you know. And and that's what these experiences are about, transmuting our knowledge into wisdom.
Yep.
And suddenly with wisdom, it's for ourselves, and but we take these things, these experiences, and they are still a part of us. There's power there. That there's power from my time, those 12 years in the desert.
Yep.
And I was part of some dark things. I did some amazing things. I helped people. I was a teacher then. I was a mentor to other soldiers and airmen, and I helped protect people, even though I was also not protecting other people. But it's complicated. But there's all that stuff that definitely informs me. I was a driven professional. I was completed, so I can understand someone who's busy in a corporate job, or something
Right.
like that. It helps me communicate with them in a way that makes sense to them.
Right. 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 So I'm curious then, what did you learn in the desert? What did it teach you?
It taught me the value of humanity, that we're all connected. I did, even before I had my spiritual moment, that we're all human, that you know we're fighting these wars. Wars are, I'm not into politics, but wars are this political thing, usually not connected to what everyone's being told that we're there for. At some point it just becomes an exercise in futility. um
Mm.
and I learned the value of humanness and human connection. And I also learned the value of working hard and
Right.
being completely dedicated to something. I didn't realize it at the time. Now I'm a spiritualist, I kind of get it, but I was living my purpose back then. My purpose was to do that job and do it
Yeah.
as well as I could. And there's power in doing something, like when you're completely dedicated to your craft,
Yes.
there's something powerful about that. And whether you're an artist or you're a driven soldier, or you're an accountant, it doesn't matter. If you're completely dedicated to what you're doing, you're gonna find something innately spiritual in that, even if you don't realize it.
Funny, I heard an expression once that's always stayed with me. I've never forgotten it. It's life in forward is an art, but when you look back and all the things that you've done, it's a science. So it's like you had to go here to go here to go here to get that lesson to get you this point to where you are right now. But in that exact moment, you're freestyling. You're just like, you're
Yeah.
I'll take and make the best decision that I have with the data I've got, because I don't know any better and I'm just trying to figure it out. I oftentimes equate it to parenting, right? Like, no one's giving you a manual, when this child pops out and go, here you go. Here's parent one, you've got to figure it out, right? And so, but the process of figuring it out, when you get to that endpoint, if you will, and I don't even like the word endpoint, but when you get that checkpoint and you sort of look back, you're like, oh, wait a second. Like, these are the things I needed to do because that's why I'm here.
Right. Yeah, it's all part of how we got to where we got. And I love that. And you talk about, we make all these decisions and there's no instruction manual to life. Like when we're kids, like no one, see, always freaks me out because no one ever told me as a teenager or a young adult, hey, you're going to become an adult, and actually nobody has it figured out. No one tells us that. Like, I feel like they should tell us that.
No, they don't. We don't. They don't. Well, it's funny. You think now when you get you get a new phone, they don't got instruction books no more. Like they don't,
No,
right? Once upon a time, you're like, oh, I'm going through the instruction manual. You're like, figure it
right.
out, man. Like turn it on
That's
and
right.
figure it out. And that's, I think that's in life that happens an awful lot. And I think it's for that reason, it's so important that we give ourselves some grace, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
and sometimes, you know, our mistakes, while they're deemed as mistakes, there also can be powerful lessons. In fact, I only think it's a mistake when you walk away without the lesson. Then you made a mistake, right?
Right. Yeah, as long as you learn from it. And I love the word grace because I think our society doesn't teach us grace. It teaches us to take care of other people. It very rarely
Mm,
teaches us to take care of ourselves. And we're not good to anybody else if we're not good to ourselves. If
got
so
you.
it if we lift up ourselves, if we love ourselves, suddenly we're lifting up the whole world around us. That you change yourself, you change the world.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So maybe John, I know you sort of talked about being a spiritual seeker and a pathway that you're on. Maybe you could share some of, you know, your core beliefs with us, and
Sure.
what the things that you stay firm and hold on to.
Yeah, from a larger perspective, I'm a universalist. I call myself an omnist. That means that I respect all religions, all spiritual
Okay,
philosophies, all philosophy or self-help ideas, whatever. I'm a fan, and within that, I have my own beliefs that are within that umbrella. I subscribe to kind of the universal aspects of Hinduism and the universal Brahman, and the oneness of things. I like Taoism and that balance of the yin and the yang, the dark and the light, and we walk that balance in between. There's certain pagan ideologies and Native American traditions. I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it talks about some really interesting Native American traditions and stuff. And I don't practice that directly, but it's informed my own path.
sure.
Like you were talking about earlier, it's all very unique. We all have our fiercely unique path, um, but we can take all these different parts that are very complementary to one another and use them. So I kind of I I I read a lot about religions from around the world, spiritual ideas from New Age spirituality all the way through
Sure.
ancient religions, and try to take whatever makes the most sense from all this great human thought from around the world.
It's interesting when you sort of look, I'd love to get your perspective on this, but oftentimes there's such a common theme of correlation between all these religions. Like, you know, maybe it's again that path, right? We talk about that path. Everyone's on these religions are equivalent to our individual path, but it just seems to me that they're all marching towards that same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I was raised Southern Baptist in Oklahoma,
Okay.
and from both sides of my family. And I'm not Christian anymore. I don't identify as Christian, but I tell people I feel more Christian today than I ever felt in the church, in the Southern Baptist Church.
Hmm.
And that's because I feel the commonality with a lot of those ideas. And if you look at the teachings of Jesus Christ, or you look at the teachings of Gautama Buddha, I mean, what's the difference, right? Like,
Right.
they're just saying the same thing in, I think, very sometimes different ways, but very similar ways as well. Especially if you just, you know, if you look at the base idea of what they're saying
Yep.
without all this human stuff that's touching it, all these rules and the dogma, and you
Hmm.
you get rid of all that. Yeah, we're very similar beings.
Got you. Got you. It seems that on that pathway I talked about, it's sort of leading to what's oftentimes referred to as a higher self, right? Or
Yeah,
a higher
absolutely.
version of who you are. I wonder if you can kind of define that just a bit for listeners who are listening, going, okay, what exactly does that mean? And, you know, higher
Sure.
self, like in a ladder or something, like what does that mean, right? Like help us understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a metaphysical question. I like that. So I think when you get down, so we have our mind and ego, right? It's been keep our ego and mind have been keeping us alive for thousands of years. They think for us, they keep us alive, they make us breathe and survive, and
Sure.
but that's not us. That's not who we are, right? Like behind that, there's a consciousness, and behind that, what's that consciousness connected to, right? Like scientists, quantum physicists know that consciousness exists, but they can't explain it.
Okay.
But they believe that the fundamental blocks of life are built on that. So scientifically, it's this thing that they can't even define. From a philosophical, spiritual, religious standpoint, it's that divine self, that self with a capital S. It's the universe that we're all stardust. That we're all connected. If you're Christian, it's that Christ consciousness, that idea of the divine Christ, or
Right.
if it's Hindu, it's that Brahman. It's if you're indigenous of different beliefs, it could be just nature itself, and that we're all nature. That we aren't in nature, we are nature.
Right.
And so it's all these things that are within us, but also, that we're part of this whole thing. We're connected. We're all energy. We're all going back to the same beginning, you know, if that makes sense. I think that's our higher self. Our higher self goes back to all that. For me, it's a oneness of everything. I'm
Hmm.
kind of that pantheistic idea of connection, but for other people, it may be a little bit different from that. But I still think that we can get in the same, at least city of the same ballpark, maybe.
I've never heard that expression, go back to the same beginning, before. That's a new one for me. So it's interesting. Could you just expand on a bit further when you say it? What does that mean?
Well, if you go, I see it in two ways for me. I love
Okay.
that question. One, we're all stardust. We're all coming from the same, stuff. We're made up of the same stuff. We came from the same place. Like it all started somewhere. And you could also look at it from a different perspective. It's similar. We, you know, e- Archaeologically, anthropologically, scientifically, we all walked out of Africa. We all walked out of East Africa.
Okay.
At some point, we came from the same place. We were all one.
Hmm.
um whether you subscribe to the Bible or you subscribe to the Vedic traditions in Hindu, we were all one thing. We are all one tribe, and we walked out of and spread around the world. So if you trace all that back, what does that mean? So I think we have to ask that question, because that's kind of what I'm talking about. But it also goes back to we're all energy, and we're made of stars. Like, we're literally, scientifically, we're made of stuff from the stars, and we all came from the same place.
I love the way that sounds, John. I got to tell you, made from stars.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious for you. Again, once you got to that point of sort of awakening and realization, what changed? What about you changed immediately?
I changed the whole way I lived. I changed how I ate, and how I slept, and I was more at peace. So I had less anxiety. I was more grounded and centered. Um, and I stopped arguing with strangers on the internet about politics. Uh, I stopped arguing
You,
with family at Thanksgiving.
I was gonna say, you just reserve it to family and friends now.
No, I stopped arguing with family at Thanksgiving too. Like, I used to debate politics with my cousins and my uncle, and now I don't, because to me, like, if you and I, or me and my neighbor, or me and some person across the planet talk, we probably have 90% of stuff that we agree on. So
Right.
why are you about the 10%? You know. So that was life. It was this life-changing thing of not living with judgment, not living of judgment. I don't judge myself. I try not to judge others. I try to forgive myself and forgive others. I'm not perfect with that. I still have
Sure.
judgment, but when you live that way, when you tempt it, it's this freeing thing. It's this freedom. So it was a complete change in my life.
And I think that process of change is really a fascinating one, John. That we kind of go through, and um, the things that now, these new realizations that appear, and I say, and although I say appear, the fact of the matter is they were always there. It wasn't like someone put them there. Okay, I'm realizing. Oh wow, thanks for planning that for me. It was always there, just the blinders that we had on were kind of lifted a bit more and allowed us to see that. And much like yourself, I'm a fan of the word grace too, because that allows you to see those things without beating up yourself, without guilt, without judging yourself, and just being able to accept things as they are. I wonder if you sort of could talk about the significance of grace and what it can do for us.
When you have grace and you love yourself, and you have grace for yourself, you have grace for others as well, then you're less attached to outcomes. You're also
Mm,
giving yourself space and time. when you have grace for yourself, you're literally giving yourself calm. You're literally giving yourself peace, because we often approach ourselves with this harshness. It's this harshness that's been, to some extent, put on us by society, our teachers, our parents, our coworkers, our bosses, all this stuff. And we have to realize that we didn't put that on us. We kind of accepted it and are rolling with it, but we don't have to have that on us.
Right.
We can take it off. And that's grace, and it's not just for yourself, but having grace for others. If we judge ourselves harshly, and we do, we also often judge others unfairly. We judge them based on the things that they do, and there are things that we would do, but we don't judge even though we're harsh on ourselves, we look at it differently when we look at other people and we judge them. It's just like getting mad when we're driving. If somebody cuts us off or something happens, then it was on purpose, right? It was just this bad thing. But when we do it, oh, I didn't mean to do that. It was an accident, So that's the perfect example, because you could just let it go, smile,
Sure.
and just let your day go on. Because what does holding on to that do for you? What does it do for them? What does it do
Right.
for anybody?
Right.
That's just one small example of grace. But it's this huge thing. And it's self-love. It's loving yourself and knowing that it's okay to do that, that it's okay to take care of yourself and take that time and space to have that grace.
Yeah, no, I really, truly am a big fan of grace and what it can do, not only for ourselves, but for others, as you alluded to. And I thank you for touching on that. It just is very clear to me that as we move through this pathway of life, there is a huge benefit to us sort of being open, right, to what comes, to not fight against it, but allow things to happen. And I think if we sort of recognize that, and as hard as, and John, I don't say this like as a piece of cake when bad stuff happens. Well, good, I'm supposed to. This was like, no, I'm not trying to suggest that at all. I'm not suggesting our listeners or you would know as well that these things are hard in the moment, but at the same time, in this perverse way, they serve a purpose, right? Whether we want to recognize it or accept it or not, they do serve a purpose, doesn't it? Don't they?
Yeah, everything happens for a reason, and we can't take the bad or the dark out of the universe. We can't. People have tried; it doesn't work. So yeah, it doesn't happen necessarily. It's not necessarily easy, and sometimes it takes work, but it's worth it. And it gets easier when you start to live a certain way, when you start to have perspective and mindset in a certain way. Then that happened. You talked about being open. You have to be open to change. You have to be open. I talk about being open to the universe. The universe will send you these amazing things, but if you're not open to the universe, it's like, and I tell this story sometimes, but the story of the guy that's on top of the house and it's flooding and the canoe comes by and he's like, "Hey buddy, could you use a ride?" And the guy's like, "No, God will save me." And then the guy comes in a motorboat and he's like, "Hey, could you use a ride?" And the guy's like, "No, God's going to save me." And the guy comes in a helicopter and a Black Hawk to try to rescue him off the roof. He's like, "No, God's got it." And he drowns and he goes to heaven and is like, "What the hell, God?" And then God's like, "Well, I did send like 3 different modes of transportation to pick you up." So you got to accept and be ready for what the universe gives you, and you got to meet the universe halfway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a part, and that's I love that, meet the universe halfway, because there's an onus that we have, right? It's not about hey, something's happened to me, let me pray and wait for it to get the answer. There's some work that we've got to do, whether that's some personal work, right? To equip our bodies, hearts, and minds with whatever is going on to us in that moment, or something outward that we've got to do to help our own situation. But to sit back and chill and be like, all right, let's see what happens, or to put your head in the ground like an ostrich, or roll up in a ball like them little tortoises or something. I mean, that's not going to help you, man.
Yeah, exactly. And if we talked earlier about, we don't believe in absolutes, but that there's this idea of change is the absolute motion. And if we're standing still and the universe is moving all around us, if the world is moving all around us and we're standing still, we can't expect we can't expect good things to happen necessarily because we're not moving with the world. We're not moving with the universe. We're not, it's that rhythm, right? People love music. They love that freestyle, it's that movement, that motion, that rhythm. Be with it. Be with that motion.
Yeah. Yeah. I truly believe that we as individuals, we create or make our own breaks, right? I'm not going to lay in bed with my head under the pillow and great things are going to happen. Like it's as a result of, and maybe that is, that tree that grew was a result of a seed that was planted many, many years ago, or perhaps planted by someone else on my behalf. But nonetheless, there is a process, and the timing of life is a beautiful thing because things happen when they should happen at the right time. And that's an important one too, when we talk about being open.
Yeah, exactly. And there, that idea of being ready, and people, it comes up a lot in self-help and self-improvement. And uh sometimes I think self-help, self-improvement gets a bad rap in our country, especially because it's like there's all this stuff out there that'll help you. Go use it. It's good
That's
stuff.
it.
There's so
That's it.
yeah, just be ready.
That's it. I love it. I love it. And so when we sort of, roll, connect that full circle back to this podcast, right, where much of our conversations are about, listen, take that step, make that move, be your bold, audacious self. And sometimes people think that, is that guy, the loudest person in the room. And that's not it at all. It's really lends itself to you being your true, authentic individual that you're supposed to be. And we're all supposed to be someone, John. We're all supposed to be someone. Be that person.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I spend so much time talking to people about living your higher purpose or your dharma. And like, do you know what your dharma is? Do you know what your higher purpose is? And if you can't answer that question, you need to find out what your because we all it's all unique to us. So if you know, once you once you get that sense of what your higher purpose or dharma is, are you living it with your daily life? Are you living it in your job?
Right.
Are you aligned with it? Because yeah, do you know who you are? Are you living your purpose? That's huge. It's a huge thing.
Yeah, no, and it's almost like, no, almost it is like, once you've got that clarity of who you are, your steps make sense, right? Like
Yeah.
you're all of a sudden, you're not doing things that don't align with you. It's like so I don't drink, so me hanging out in the bar doesn't make sense for me, right? Because that's
Right.
not who I am. And so that same kind of thing, whereas you're doing you and the things that make sense for you, as opposed to aimlessly floating around in the breeze and not really knowing what's next.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you love? Go do that. Like
Mm.
what do you go to bed and think, man, I can't wait to wake up and do this tomorrow. Yeah, go do that.
I was thinking about this podcast interview last night. So there you go, John. I was
That's
excited
great.
about it.
Yeah.
But I tell you, because this is that you do what you love and things that you enjoy. And so I'm with you 100%, man. This has been really a great chat, John, and I appreciate the insights and the perspectives. I really do think that's kind of how we when we talk about how we learn and develop, grow, and evolve. Oftentimes, it's through dialogues and through individual that we learn from one another, and whether they're in the books or podcasts or conversation. I think they're important to have because they give us a perspective that was probably always there. We just didn't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that.
Very cool. So for listeners that wanted to connect with you, John, and learn more about your work, where could we send them?
Yeah, our main website is kishar.org. That's KISHAR.org. That's the entrance to our community and our individual guidance and coaching. And we also have links to our socials, and we have a pretty cool YouTube channel as well they can check out. That's linked through there as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, John, this has been awesome. I really appreciate this. And I think it's important that it's congratulations on finding your path. I think sometimes, that gets, that goes, we don't shine the proper light on that because that in itself is a journey. And the fact that you not only found yours, but you're helping others find theirs is a really, really big thing. So I got to acknowledge that. Congratulations, and keep up the great work, my friend.
Thanks, Audley. I appreciate it. And you too. I love what you're doing putting out in the world.
Thanks. You know, in this episode, John shared his transformative journey from a life of service to self-discovery and spiritual enlightenment. His insights into healing, resilience, and self-acceptance resonate with our theme of living audaciously and boldly. John reminds us that grace and self-acceptance are key to living authentically. By letting go of judgment and embracing forgiveness, we can find peace and freedom in our lives. Now, if John's story resonates with you and you'd like to learn more about his work or connect with him directly, be sure to check out the show notes below for his contact details. To our audience, I want to say thank you again for tuning into the Audacious Living Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode and found value in our conversation that we had with John, please consider liking, following, or sharing this podcast to help us reach more listeners and help grow this audacious way of living. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories and empowering insights that will uplift and motivate you to live your best life ever. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.